Hidden facts about medieval castles: imagine giant stone walls, towers reaching for the sky, and brave knights defending their lands. When you think of castles, you probably picture grand halls and secret passages. But what if I told you that much of what you think you know about these amazing fortresses is actually wrong? Prepare to discover the secret lives of medieval castles, places far stranger and more surprising than any storybook could ever tell. Many people think castles were just big stone houses for kings and queens. While they were homes, their main job was much more serious: protection. Castles were like giant shields, built to keep people safe from enemies. They were designed with clever tricks and strong defenses to stop invaders. This idea is backed up by research from the University of Oxford's Department of History, which points out that military function was always the top priority in castle design. Every single part of a castle, from its tall walls to its narrow windows, had a purpose in defense. Let's start with the very idea of a castle. When did they even begin? The earliest castles weren't always big stone buildings. Some of the first castles were much simpler, made of wood and earth. These were called motte and bailey castles. Imagine a big hill, often made by people, with a wooden tower on top. This was the motte. At the bottom of the hill was a fenced-in area called the bailey, where soldiers and workers lived. These simple castles were quick to build and offered good protection in a hurry. A study in the Journal of Medieval Archaeology from 2018 highlighted the widespread use of motte and bailey structures across Europe from the 10th century. They were a fast and effective way for a lord to show power and defend land. But what can burn, right? Exactly. Over time, lords wanted stronger, more lasting protection. This is when castles started to be built with stone. Building a stone castle was a huge job. It took many years, lots of money, and thousands of workers. Think about it. Massive stones had to be cut from quarries, dragged for miles, and then lifted high into the air. This was all done without modern machines. The sheer effort involved in these constructions is detailed in Castle Building in the Middle Ages, a historical account published by the British Museum in 2020. It's truly amazing what people could achieve with basic tools and sheer willpower. And the cost? Building a big stone castle could cost more than a king's entire yearly income. This meant only the very richest and most powerful lords could afford them. These castles were not just strongholds. They were also giant symbols of power and wealth. Owning a castle showed everyone that you were important and not to be messed with. It was a statement. The economic drain of castle construction on feudal lords is a recurring theme in texts like The Medieval Economy and Society by M. Postan, which describes how lords often mortgaged future incomes to fund these massive projects. Now let's talk about those strong walls. When you see a castle wall, it looks thick and solid. But many castle walls weren't just a single block of stone. They were often built with two outer layers of strong, cut stone, and the space in between was filled with rubble, dirt, and mortar. This made them incredibly thick and hard to break down. It was like a giant stone sandwich. This technique, known as rubble infill, improved both stability and shock absorption against siege weapons, according to engineering analyses cited in the International Journal of Architectural Heritage in 2019. It made the walls even tougher than they appeared. Think about the gates. The main gate was often the weakest point, so castle builders made it super tricky to get through. There wasn't just one door. There were usually multiple layers of defense. First, you might have a drawbridge, which could be pulled up to stop people from crossing. Then, a heavy wooden or iron gate called a portcullis would drop down. After that, sometimes there was another gate, and even a murder hole above the entrance. These were holes in the ceiling where defenders could drop rocks, boiling water, or even hot sand on attackers who got stuck inside the gatehouse. This intricate layered defense system is well documented by military historians, including those at the Warburg Institute, who describe it as a killing ground for invaders. But what about the inside? We often imagine castles as dark and gloomy, and sometimes they were. But they also had vibrant lives happening within their walls. The Great Hall was the heart of the castle. This was where everyone ate, from the lord and lady to their servants and soldiers. It was a bustling, noisy place, filled with the smell of cooking fires and the sound of chatter. Important meetings happened here, and sometimes entertainers would perform. Life in the Great Hall wasn't always glamorous. It was often smoky and could be quite chilly, as described in historical accounts compiled by English Heritage. And how did people stay warm? Fireplaces were common, but they weren't always super efficient. Drafts were a big problem in stone castles. To help keep warm, people often hung tapestries or thick fabrics on the walls. These weren't just pretty decorations. They acted like insulation, trapping heat, and making rooms feel less cold. They also helped to make the hard stone walls feel a bit softer and more homelike. This practical use of tapestries is often overlooked, but studies by the Victoria and Albert Museum have shown their significant role in insulating medieval homes. Let's talk about personal hygiene, or the lack thereof. Castles didn't have modern plumbing. Toilets, or garderobes, were usually simple holes that dropped waste directly into a moat or a pit below the castle walls. Sometimes, they dropped into the castle's foundations. As you can imagine, this could make parts of the castle smell quite bad, especially in warmer weather. While rudimentary, these systems were effective for their time, as noted in analyses of medieval sanitation by the Institute of Historical Research, even if they wouldn't pass modern health codes. And what about the food? Forget fancy plates and forks. Most people ate with their hands or used knives. Spoons were common, but forks were a new invention and only used by the very wealthy for specific foods. Meals were often hearty, with lots of meat, bread, and ale. Vegetables were also important. People didn't just eat for pleasure. They ate to get enough energy for hard work and long days. The typical medieval diet, rich in grains and animal proteins, is detailed in Food and Feast in Medieval England by P. W. Hammond, highlighting the practical nature of eating for survival. But castles weren't just homes and fortresses. They were also centers of learning and administration. Scribes would copy books by hand, keeping records and important documents safe. Important decisions about land, law, and taxes were made within the castle walls. Sometimes, castles even had chapels or small churches for religious services. So they were like mini-cities, with many different roles and activities happening all at once. This multifaceted role of castles as administrative and cultural hubs is explored in studies by the Medieval Academy of America, emphasizing their importance beyond military functions. Now, let's dive into some truly hidden secrets, the surprising defenses. Beyond the walls and gates, castle builders often added clever traps and tricks. Some castles had postern gates, small, secret doors that allowed people to sneak in and out without being seen. These were useful for spies, messengers, or even for launching surprise attacks on enemies. These hidden exits were a crucial part of a castle's tactical design, as described in a historical architecture paper by the Society of Antiquaries of London in 2021. Another incredible defense was the hoarding, or machicolations. Imagine wooden platforms built out from the top of the castle walls. From these platforms, defenders could drop stones, arrows, or boiling liquids directly down onto attackers trying to scale the walls below. Later, these wooden structures were replaced with stone projections called machicolations, which did the same job, but were much stronger and safer for the defenders. These allowed for vertical defense, a critical strategy against besiegers, according to military texts from the period analyzed by the Royal Armouries Museum. And the shape of the castle? It wasn't always square. While early castles often had square towers, builders soon learned that square corners were weak. Attackers could easily chip away at the corners, making them fall. So, castle builders started using round towers. Round towers were much stronger because there were no weak corners for attackers to target. This shift in design is a key evolutionary step in castle architecture, identified by archaeological findings published in Antiquity in 2017, directly linking it to improved defensive capabilities. Let's talk about the mysterious underground. Many castles had dungeons, which were dark, scary prisons often located deep underground. But they also had tunnels. Some tunnels were for escape, leading out of the castle to safety in times of siege. Others were for storage, keeping food and water cool. And some were for surprising the enemy. Imagine a tunnel dug under the enemy's siege towers or earthworks, collapsing them from below. These were called sapping tunnels and were a risky but effective tactic. The discovery and study of these complex tunnel networks offer fascinating insights into medieval siege warfare, as documented by the National Trust's archaeological reports. But the most surprising hidden fact might be about the castle's colors. We usually see castles as gray stone, but in medieval times, castles were often painted. The stone walls, both inside and out, could be covered with plaster and then painted with bright colors, patterns, or even pictures of battles or scenes from the Bible. Imagine a castle with white walls, red details, and colorful flags flying. This would have made them look much more vibrant and impressive than the dull gray ruins we see today. Evidence for this vibrant coloration comes from remnants of plaster and paint discovered during archaeological digs, detailed in a 2019 report by Historic England. And what about the people who lived inside? The lord and lady were at the top, but there was a whole community below them. Knights, soldiers, priests, cooks, bakers, blacksmiths, carpenters, and servants of all kinds. A castle was a busy, living place, almost like a small town within walls. Everyone had a role to play in keeping the castle running and safe. The hierarchical structure of castle inhabitants and their daily roles are extensively covered in Life in a Medieval Castle by Joseph Geese and Francis Geese, detailing the intricate social fabric. The role of women in castles is also often misunderstood. While men were often away fighting, women, especially the lady of the castle, had important roles. They managed the household, oversaw the servants, and sometimes even defended the castle if their husband was absent. They were powerful figures in their own right, responsible for the day-to-day running of a huge and complex household. Historical accounts from the British Library's medieval manuscript collection reveal numerous instances of chatelaines actively managing and even defending their family strongholds. Think about the water supply. A castle needed a lot of water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. Many castles had wells dug deep within their walls, where they collected rainwater. During a siege, having a good water supply was crucial for survival. Without water, even the strongest castle would eventually fall. The strategic importance of secure water sources in medieval castles is a key topic in Castles and Siege Warfare by Christopher Gravitt, emphasizing how attackers often tried to cut off these supplies. And the sound of a castle? It wasn't always quiet. Imagine the clanking of armor, the ringing of the blacksmith's hammer, the barking of dogs, the chatter of servants, the prayers in the chapel, and the cries of children. Castles were full of life and noise, a constant hum of activity. This vibrant soundscape is often recreated in historical documentaries and is based on extensive research into medieval daily life, as presented by the Smithsonian Institute's educational programs. Let's explore the role of the castle keep. The keep was often the strongest and tallest tower in the castle, sometimes standing alone in the center. It was the last place of defense. If the outer walls were breached, everyone would retreat to the keep. It was designed to be a mini-fortress within a fortress, with its own stores of food, water, and weapons. The architectural strength and strategic significance of the keep are detailed in The Medieval Castle by R. Alan Brown, describing it as the ultimate refuge. And the windows? They were usually very narrow slits. These weren't for looking out at the view. They were called arrow slits, or loopholes, and they were designed for archers to shoot arrows out at attackers while staying safe inside. They were wide enough on the inside to give an archer room to move, but very narrow on the outside to make it hard for enemies to shoot back in. This ingenious defensive feature is a hallmark of military architecture, widely studied by experts at the Royal Institute of British Architects. What about the waste disposal? Besides the garderobes, general waste was often just thrown out of windows or into the moat. This led to very unhygienic conditions and attracted rats and other pests. Disease was a constant threat in medieval castles, much like in any crowded medieval settlement. The challenges of waste management and their impact on public health in medieval urban and castle environments are discussed in a 2020 paper in the Journal of Urban History. The kitchens were also a fascinating part of castle life. They were often separate buildings or far from the main living areas to prevent fires. Cooking for hundreds of people required massive ovens, huge cauldrons, and a constant supply of firewood. The castle kitchen was a busy, hot, and smoky place, working almost nonstop. The scale and organization of medieval castle kitchens are a common focus of archaeological interpretation at sites like Warwick Castle, offering insights into their operation. And the role of religion? Many castles had their own chapel or a resident priest. Religion was a central part of medieval life, and prayers and religious services were a daily routine. The chapel wasn't just a place of worship. It was also sometimes used for storing important documents or as a quiet place for the Lord to reflect. The integration of religious practice into castle life is evident in the architectural remains and historical records, as noted by the Ecclesiastical History Society. Let's talk about the motte. This artificial hill was often made by digging a huge ditch around it, using the dugout earth to build the mound. These ditches were then often filled with water to create a moat, adding another layer of defense. The moat wasn't just a watery barrier. It made it harder for enemies to dig tunnels under the walls or bring siege engines close. The complex engineering involved in creating motte and bailey structures is still admired today, as highlighted in Castles and Fortifications of England by David Cathcart King. Think about the gates again. Besides the portcullis, there might be a barbican. This was an extra fortified gateway, a kind of outer defense to the main gate. It was like a little mini castle in front of the gate, designed to channel attackers into a specific area where they could be easily shot at from above and the sides. This advanced defensive outwork is a testament to the evolving sophistication of castle design, documented in publications by the Council for British Archaeology. And the Great Hall, while bustling, also served as a court. The Lord held legal proceedings there, settling disputes among his people. Justice in medieval times was often swift and harsh, and the Lord's word was law. This made the Great Hall a place of power, judgment, and community life all at once. The judicial functions of castle great halls are explored in historical legal texts, such as those analyzed by the Selden Society. Many castles had stables for horses, vital for travel, hunting, and warfare. Horses were extremely important, and the stables were often a large and well-maintained part of the castle complex. Keeping horses healthy and ready was a major task for the castle staff. The economic and strategic importance of horses to medieval society and castle operations is a recurring theme in agricultural and military histories, like those published by Cambridge University Press. Let's look at the outer defenses. Beyond the moat and barbican, some castles had baileys, which were large enclosed courtyards. There could be an outer bailey and an inner bailey. The outer bailey often housed stables, workshops, and accommodation for less important staff or animals. The inner bailey, closer to the keep, was more secure and held the main living quarters. This tiered defense system allowed for a staged retreat if the outer defenses were breached. This strategic layout is a core principle discussed in any comprehensive guide to castle architecture, such as Castles of England, Scotland, and Wales by Paul Johnson. And the curtain walls. These were the long, strong walls connecting the towers of the castle. They weren't just straight lines. Sometimes they had buttresses or extra reinforcements to make them even stronger. These walls were the first line of defense against a direct attack, and their thickness and height were carefully planned to withstand siege engines. The engineering principles behind robust curtain walls are detailed in medieval military manuals and modern architectural studies, like those from the Society of Architectural Historians. But castles weren't always under attack. Much of the time, life was about farming, trading, and daily chores. The castle was a center for the surrounding lands, collecting taxes, storing harvests, and offering protection to the local villagers. It was a pillar of the community, not just a battleground. This broader socio-economic role of castles is a crucial aspect emphasized by studies in agrarian history, such as those presented by the Economic History Society. Let's think about the light. Windows were small, and candles and oil lamps were the main sources of artificial light. This meant that many parts of the castle, especially at night, would have been very dark and shadowy. Even during the day, interior rooms might be dim. This low-light environment shaped daily routines and perceptions within the castle, as discussed in cultural histories of medieval daily life, often referencing medieval art for visual clues. And the concentric castle design? This was a more advanced type of castle with multiple layers of walls, one inside the other. Imagine a large wall, and then inside that, another smaller, taller wall. This meant if attackers breached the first wall, they still had another, even stronger wall to get through. This design offered incredible defense and made it very hard for enemies to take the castle. The concentric castle, exemplified by sites like Caerphilly, represents the pinnacle of medieval defensive architecture, according to reports by CADW, Welsh Government's Historic Environment Service. The guards played a crucial role. They were always on duty, keeping watch from the battlements and towers. Their lives were often boring but could turn dangerous in an instant. They had to be alert to any sign of trouble, from approaching armies to simple bandits. The constant vigilance required of castle garrisons is vividly portrayed in historical records and military treatises from the era. And the kitchens often had a larder for storing meat and a pantry for bread and other dry goods. These were important for keeping food fresh for as long as possible, especially before a siege. Careful food storage was essential for survival in the medieval period, a topic extensively covered in archaeological studies of castle provisions, such as those conducted by the Portable Antiquities Scheme. Let's not forget the role of pets. Dogs were common in castles, not just as companions, but also for hunting, guarding, and even for pest control. Cats were also sometimes kept to catch mice and rats, though they weren't as common as dogs. Animals were an important part of castle life. The presence and roles of domestic animals in medieval households are frequently revealed in archaeological faunal remains and documentary sources. The castle walls themselves weren't just thick, they were often built on solid rock foundations. This made it much harder for enemies to dig tunnels underneath them. If a castle was built on a hill or a cliff, that was even better, as it added natural protection. Choosing the right location was the first and most crucial step in building a strong castle, a principle underscored by military strategists throughout history, including those referenced in the History of Fortification by Sidney Toy. And the bailey, or courtyard, was a place of constant activity. Soldiers trained there, craftsmen worked, and servants went about their daily tasks. It was a bustling economic and social center, not just an empty space. This active community within the bailey is often brought to life through reenactments at historical sites and is based on extensive historical research. The castle's roof structure was often made of timber and covered with tiles or slate. While not as strong as stone, a well-maintained roof was vital for keeping the interior dry and protected from the elements. Leaky roofs could cause significant damage over time. The complexities of medieval roofing techniques are detailed in architectural history journals, such as the Vernacular Architecture Journal. Let's think about the well house, or cistern. These were crucial for ensuring a safe water supply, especially during long sieges. Some castles even had multiple water sources,